Hello, it's Tuesday. This is Stand Up Daily. Joining me today, Wajahat Ali and Aaron David Miller. My name is Pete Dominic. Time to stand up with me right now. Well, hello, and happy Tuesday if you're listening on Tuesday. If you're listening on another day, happy whatever day you're listening. Thank you for checking me out here on Stand Up Daily, which opens every day, each weekday, with a great news segment going through the last 24 hours of news, and then welcomes at least two guests. Joining me today, Wajahat Ali, and I will talk about all the latest issues in America, from guns to immigration to the Derek Chauvin trial and much, much more. And then we are going to talk with Aaron David Miller about the Israeli election, as well as how domestic politics affects foreign policy and how foreign policy has only become more complex over his career. Always a great conversation with Aaron David Miller. Those are my guests. I've got a great news segment coming up for you, and I'm very excited to have you joining me. So if you haven't already given this podcast 5 stars on Apple and a review, then please do it. If you aren't supporting me with a paid subscription, I'd love to have that as well. Can't do it without your support. Sign up now at patreon.com/Pete Dominic, or just go to the show notes and hit the paid subscription link, and then you can sign up there and become a part of our amazing community of listeners who meets each and every Thursday night in a virtual hang, and looking forward to seeing you this week. Well, I had a very productive day myself and got a lot done, but still thinking I might take a day off or two, not post a podcast. Don't be surprised if I decide to do that at the last minute. You'll survive without me, won't you? All right, let's get to the last 24 hours in news in what I call the last 24. Let's start with your COVID headlines. The big one is more than a dozen states are opening vaccines to all adults in a major expansion of COVID-19 shots for tens of millions of Americans amid a worrisome increase in the virus cases and concerns about balancing supply and demand for the vaccines. My wife got her second shot of the Pfizer yesterday, and I guess this means I can sign up now in New York. I'm officially eligible as of, I think, midnight tonight. I'm going to check and see if I can sign up. Very excited to get my vaccine. Been waiting patiently, and now it looks like it might just happen before April. I mean, at least at the beginning of April. London recorded 0 COVID-19 daily deaths for the first time in 6 months as cases soared elsewhere in Europe. The president of Pakistan says apparently he has coronavirus just hours after the government imposed a partial lockdown in high-risk areas in the country amid a sharp spike in new cases. But most of the attention on Monday probably went to the director of the CDC, Dr. Rochelle Walensky, who gave a very impassioned, dire warning about a new surge of COVID cases and deaths. And she even got a little emotional. This went pretty viral. Here's a little excerpt.
I'm going to pause here. I'm going to lose the script, and I'm going to reflect on the recurring feeling I have of impending doom. We have so much to look forward to, so much promise and potential of where we are, and so much reason for hope. But right now, I'm scared. I know what it's like as a physician to stand in that patient room, gowned, gloved, masked, shielded, and to be the last person to touch someone else's loved one because their loved one couldn't be there. I know what it's like when you're the physician, when you're the healthcare provider, and you're worried that you don't have the resources to take care of the patients in front of you. I know that feeling of nausea when you read the crisis standards of care and you wonder whether there are going to be enough ventilators to go around and who's going to make that choice. And I know what it's like to pull up to your hospital every day and see the extra morgue sitting outside.
And later she went on MSNBC with Rachel Maddow and a better audio connection and said a lot of optimistic things, but then this.
Today, we have 93 million Americans who have gotten their first dose, 51 million who have gotten their second dose, and we can kind of almost see the end. We're vaccinating so very fast. Our data from the CDC today suggest, that vaccinated people do not carry the virus, don't get sick, and that it's not just in the clinical trials, but it's also in real-world data. And yet, on the other side, I'm watching the cases tick up. I'm watching us have increased numbers of hypertransmissible variants. I'm watching our travel numbers tick up. And the sense is I've seen what it looks like to anticipate the oncoming surge. And what I really would hate to have happen is to have another oncoming surge just as we're reaching towards getting so many more people vaccinated. We're still losing people at 1,000 deaths a day. And so I just can't face another surge when there's so much optimism right at our fingertips.
Well, there you go. She sounds pretty alarmed, concerned. So does the president. Joe Biden warned during a Monday speech on the vaccine rollout that people shouldn't be engaging in reckless behavior right now. Here's a little bit of old Joe.
Our work is far from over. The war against COVID-19 is far from won. This is deadly serious. We share the sentiment of Dr. Walensky, the head of the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. The CDC expressed earlier today, this is not a time to lessen our efforts.
He then laid it out. He told us this scenario between spring break and a number of states lifting their mask mandates. He said the old Joe Biden good thing, bad thing. Listen.
We will administer more shots in March than any country on earth. But even so, we have to give more shots in April than we did in March. Because we're in the life and death race with the virus that is spreading quickly, with cases rising again, new variants are spreading, and sadly, some of the reckless behavior we've seen on television over the past few weeks means that more new cases are to come in the weeks ahead. With vaccines, there's hope, which is a very good thing, to state the obvious. But people are letting up on precautions, which is a very bad thing.
Good thing, bad thing. I can't stop thinking about Dana Carvey myself. And then he told us how bad it's gotten.
Cases have fallen 2/3 since I took office. Deaths have also fallen 2/3. But now cases are going back up. Now, some states, deaths are as well. We're giving up hard-fought, hard-won gains.
And then Joe Biden pleaded with the states that had dropped the mask mandates to put them back into effect. I mean, it's a hopeless request, but he has to do it.
I'm reiterating my call for every governor, mayor, and local leader to maintain and reinstate the mask mandate. Please, this is not politics. Reinstate the mandate if you let it down. And business should require masks as well. The failure to take this virus seriously, precisely what got us in this mess in the first place, risk more cases and more deaths. Look, as I do my part to accelerate the vaccine distribution and vaccinations, I need the American people to do their part as well. Mask up. Mask up. It's a patriotic duty. It's the only way we ever get back to normal. To cheer together in stadiums full of fans. To gather together on holidays again safely. Go to graduations, weddings.
And so much more. At the end of that statement, Joe Biden answered a question yelled at him by a reporter.
Thank you.
Mr. President, do you believe that some states should pause their reopening efforts?
Yes.
There's a lot of folks warning or talking and writing about how we have anxiety about getting back to normal. We should talk about that later on this week at some point, too. And if you're one of those people, let me know. I share that sentiment a bit. I haven't been miserable about this. Whether or not you've been miserable, it's just weird, miserable or happy figuring it out, negotiating the pandemic. Either way, it is weird getting back to normal, and lots of us have some anxiety about that. But let's get to Surgeon General Dr. Vivek Murthy. He echoed the worried sentiments of CDC Director Rochelle Walensky and President Biden about how we're not out of the woods yet. He was on CNN with the Wolf Blitzer.
And let me just say, Dr. Walensky is an extraordinary physician, and I think she was right on in her comments and the concerns that she raised. she feels what so many of us feel, which is a sense of deep concern as we look at the reality of what's happening in our country. There is some good news, no doubt. We have been able to vaccinate millions of people. We have come down from an all-time high in terms of infections and hospitalizations and deaths. But we have not come down all the way. And in fact, we have settled at a very high level of daily deaths, nearly 1,000. And now we're starting to see cases go up again and starting to see hospital admissions go up again. This is deeply concerning because every time we've seen it in the past, it's led to another surge. And that's what we're worried about. Look, I understand, Wolf, that all of us are exhausted. It's been a long year. And many of us, myself included, have lost family members to this virus. But there is a light that is getting bigger and bigger at the end of this tunnel, but we are still in that tunnel. And that's why we have to take critical steps that we have the power to take to reduce the spread of this virus. And that means wearing masks, means avoiding indoor gatherings with people outside our household. It means keeping our distance from others, but it also means getting vaccinated as soon as possible. That is one of the keys that we did not have last year, a vaccine. And we're already seeing that has been helping us in reducing infections and deaths.
Yeah, I just read that I can sign up tomorrow morning at 8 a.m., where that's today. If you're listening on Tuesday, I'm gonna get 3 phones or 4 phones, I think I can do, and I'll call the number and I'll let you know how it goes tomorrow. All right, the other big story is, of course, day 1 of the murder trial of Derek Chauvin. On Monday, attorneys laid out their cases in the murder trial of the former Minneapolis police officer who's charged in the death of George Floyd last spring. This is a story that many Americans are watching, paying close attention to, and I think it's a case that is bigger than the murder of one man. It's the rare opportunity for a jury of his peers to hold a member of law enforcement, a cop, accountable, and to prove to Americans that Black lives do, in fact, matter. Many of the cable news networks covered the trial, which is being televised because they're not allowed to have people in the courtroom. And this is such an important case we're going to be paying attention to for the next several weeks. Here is Justin Miller, one of the George Floyd family attorneys, yesterday.
This today is not the trial of George Floyd. And I've heard people say that. This is the George Floyd trial. This is the George Floyd trial. George Floyd is not on trial. This is the trial of Derek Chauvin, and it should be printed and spoken about that way every single time we talk about it. This trial is about America being America for all Americans, not just some of us, all Americans. And it can be that way, and it should be that way. We have to take time now to think about what we want for our children and for our families. This family behind me is suffering, and they've been suffering since the beginning of this thing, and they're going to suffer long after all of you have gone and all of us are gone.
All right, so that is one of the attorneys for the Floyd family, and here is the prosecutor and his opening statement. His name is Jerry Blackwell, and he's about to be very famous.
Police officers have difficult jobs. They have to make split-second decisions. They sometimes have to make split-second life and death decisions. This case is about Mr. Derek Chauvin and not about any of those men and women, and it's not about all policing at all. And this case is not about split-second decision-making. In 9 minutes and 29 seconds, there are 479 seconds, not a split second among them.
Not a split second among them. That was pretty good. We also heard from another witness who is the 911 dispatcher who was watching, apparently, video of this happening, and she saw what was happening. I mean, people called the police on the police, and this woman who works for the police department, or I don't know who the 911 dispatcher, she's not a cop, she called this cop's sergeant on him. Here she is.
And so when you did look back, still on the ground, like depicted here, essentially.
Correct.
And what did you think about this when you looked back and saw that it hadn't changed?
I first asked if the screens had frozen.
Why did you ask that?
Because it hadn't changed.
Okay. And did you find that it had frozen?
No.
How did
Well,
you
I
know?
was told that it was not frozen.
Did you see the screen change yourself?
Yes, I saw the person's moving.
So what did you start thinking at that point?
Something might be wrong.
Her name is Jenna Scurry. She was the first witness to take the stand in the murder trial of Derek Chauvin on Monday. She's a 911 dispatcher in Minneapolis, and she alerted the police supervisor in May after she watched officers pin George Floyd to the ground live on a surveillance camera. She said, "You can call me a snitch if you want to," before relaying what she saw on the cameras outside the convenience store named Cup Foods. I guess we're all going to learn the name of that convenience store and every detail around this trial and this horrible, horrible situation that took place in Minneapolis, which launched a new inspired Black Lives Matter movement during the pandemic, because we all watched that. We were glued to our televisions during the pandemic, and we all saw what happened in Minneapolis. But apparently the most impactful witness on day one of the trial is a black man named Donald Williams II. He was one of the loudest and clearest voices on one of the videos asking Officer Chauvin to remove his knee. He's also trained in wrestling and mixed martial arts, and he testified in the trial that the police officer used a, quote, blood choke on Floyd that cuts off his oxygen, and he's being called a star witness on day one. Here is about a 2-minute excerpt from his very stirring testimony.
And his pain and his distress that he was going through, the more that as time progressed, so when I first arrived on the scene, Mr. Floyd was vocalizing his sorriness and his pain and his distress that he was going through. The more that the knee was blocked on his neck and shimmies that were going on, the more you seen Floyd slowly fade away, and like the fish in a bag, you seen his eyes slowly, pale out, and again slowly roll to the back of his eyes. And so this is what I seen, this is what I heard, and that's how, what it was. Like, he was going through distress because of the knee, and he vocalized it that I can't breathe, I need to get up, and I'm sorry. And his eyes slowly rolled to the back of his head. You seen the blood coming out of his nose. You heard him tell him before he stopped speaking that my stomach hurts. And those, most of the time, is the last vowel movement of your life. So from there on, he was lifeless. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He didn't have no life in him, no more on his body movements.
During that time period, did you notice anything about his breathing that was significant to you?
Yes, just like in MMA, you could tell when someone gets tired, or you could tell when someone's getting choked out or things like that. His breathing was getting tremendously heavy and tremendously harder for him to breathe, and you actually could hear him. You could see him struggling to actually gasp for air while he was trying to breathe, and he barely could move while he was trying to get air.
As you were standing there, did others gather around?
Correct. At the moment, I was the most vocalist person out there pleading for Floyd's life, because I felt like it was definitely in the wrong. And there was, at one point in time, a medic came on scene, and she spoke on checking pulse, what made me even go even more harder, because I heard it and then I registered it, and like, oh, you do need to check his pulse. Oh, he is not moving. Like, oh, you just killed this man, And so her expertise was like, look, he's fading away. You need to check.
All right, and that's where the clip ended that I found. But very stirring testimony from a guy who was right there on the scene, Donald Williams II. You're going to hear a lot more about him as well. Now, here is the defense attorney trying to make the case. It looks like they are going to say George Floyd had heart disease, or he was under the influence of drugs, or that the cops themselves were distracted by the crowd that was forming. And that's, I guess, the best defense they can possibly come up with, painting the victim poorly and making up some bullshit about being distracted. But here it is.
You will see and hear that a crowd begins to develop, watching and recording officers, initially fairly passive. As the situation went on, the crowd began to grow angry. But here's what you will also see in here. You will see in here the conversation between the officers behind the squad car. The crowd is not aware of what they are saying and doing. You will learn that several bystanders, including Donald Williams and Genevieve Hansen, they grew more and more and more upset with these officers. You've seen it this morning. But you will also see it from the perspective of the police officers. As the crowd grew in size, seemingly so too did their anger. And remember, there's more to the scene than just what the officers see in front of them. There are people behind them. There are people across the street. There are cars stopping, people yelling. There is a growing crowd and what officers perceive to be a threat. They're called names. You heard them this morning. A fucking bum. They're screaming at him, causing the officers to divert their attention from the care of Mr. Floyd to the threat that was growing in front of them.
Well, I mean, of course they're calling names. He was murdering a guy. They were watching the cop murder George Floyd. So, yeah, I mean, it wouldn't have been surprising if someone ran and tackled Derek Chauvin and knocked him off of George Floyd. That would have been fine. Nobody wanted to do that because they would have probably then also been murdered by the police. Ibram Kendi said, anti-racist professor, speaker, writer. Dr. Ibram Kendi said on Twitter, defense attorney for Derek Chauvin, you will see that 3 Minneapolis officers cannot overcome the strength of Floyd. Yes, we will see the same old racist defense for police violence, the big bad black man who resisted arrest and caused his own death. Our friend Glenn Kirshner writes, Chauvin's defense attorney started by telling the jury that they needed to apply, quote, reason and common sense. Okay. What we saw on the end-of-life video was despicably unreasonable police force, and our collective common sense tells us it was criminal. He also went on to say, Glenn Kirshner on Twitter, Chauvin's defense attorney is cross-examining the 911 dispatcher about whether she's been trained in police use of force procedures. She said no, proving the point that you don't need any training to understand what these officers did was wrong. She did the right thing. All right. And finally, let's go to another attorney for George Floyd and several other victims of police violence in America. Ben Crump. Ben Crump tweeted, everything you hear today will attempt to assassinate George Floyd's character. But remember, this is the trial of Derek Chauvin, not George Floyd. He was on MSNBC, Ben Crump, last night. And let's just let it rip.
9 minutes and 29 seconds. That Derek Chauvin tortured George Floyd to death with his knee on his neck. And then the first witness was a bombshell. The fact that this 911 dispatcher said that I didn't want to be a snitch, but I knew what I was witnessing in that video was wrong. They were killing a man. And so I thought that was so impactful to start the trial off. And they ended the trial very powerfully with Donald Williams when he talked about the humanity within him, that after he went fishing and watched a fish suffocate from lack of oxygen, and then to witness a human being, George Perry Floyd Jr., suffocate from a lack of oxygen, how you can't be human and that don't affect you. However, it didn't seem to affect Derek Chauvin at all. It was intentional, him keeping his knee on his neck.
That was Mehdi Hassan, who was in for Chris Hayes on All In, and he asked Benjamin Crump the most important question. Do you think that the defense can make a strong enough case that you can get one juror to say that Derek Chauvin isn't guilty? Because that's all it takes. And it's a very good point that Mehdi Hassan and others made. It only takes one juror. And here is Ben Crump's answer to that.
I've been a civil rights attorney for all of my professional life, but I have been black all my life. And we all know that we can never take for granted that a police officer will be held accountable for killing a black person and justifiably. So even though we think the video is very compelling, that we understand that this is a referendum on can black people get equal justice in America.
So, yeah, it seemed like in the last 24 hours, the news was dominated by the trial of Derek Chauvin, and I'm sure that it will be for the next 4 weeks. I'm not sure how much I'll be able to cover it as well as I did today, but shouldn't be too hard to aggregate the highlights after the day is done and throw them on the podcast for you. And I think if I do it, it'll be helpful for those of you that don't have time to sit around watching this trial. And I do, apparently. So that's my job, and I'm happy to do it. So we'll see if I feel like I'm covering it good, and then I'll continue doing it. So you let me know if you appreciate it or not. All right, finally, 2 more clips that I just want to play for you. I'm now hearing a lot of talk about how the infrastructure bill is actually the Green New Deal, which makes sense. I mean, it's pretty smart for Democrats to message it this way. Everybody wants infrastructure. Everybody understands that there is a tremendous demand for infrastructure, from planes, trains, automobiles, a high-speed train, high-speed internet, rural internet. We need to redo everything that we have, and why not redo it in a sustainable way? Why not? Makes sense? Well, we'll see what happens, but I'm sure you're going to hear a lot more about an infrastructure deal, and you'll hear Republicans and conservatives demonizing and demagoguing it, saying that it's the Green New Deal. You know what? It is, and we need it. And what's the controversy? Here is Secretary Pete, the Secretary of Transportation, talking about the infrastructure bill.
Well, I think that there's a tremendous opportunity now to have bipartisan support for a big, bold vision on infrastructure. I see it in the conversations I'm having with Republicans and Democrats on the Hill. I definitely see it in the conversations I'm having with people across the country. Americans don't need a lot of selling to know that we've got to do big things when it comes to our infrastructure. And the truth is, you can't separate the climate part from this vision, because every road we fix, every bridge we build, we can either do it in a way that's better for the climate or worse for the climate. Why wouldn't we want to be creating these jobs in a way that's better for the climate?
Oh, my God, that guy is so good at talking. I love Mayor Pete Buttigieg. I know that a lot of my smart black friends who pay close attention to how he handled things as the mayor of South Bend and sided with police over black folks really had a lot of issues with him. And I don't blame him, and I share those issues and those problems. But I think he's evolved, and he's just one of the smartest politicians, young politicians that America has. And I see a bold, bright future for Mayor Pete, and he's going to want to get this infrastructure deal done, and he pretty much just said it. Why not do it this way? And speaking of big infrastructure ideas and renewable energy ideas, the Biden administration, this story will go undercover, but I've got it for you here on Stand Up Daily. The Biden administration made a swath of ocean between New York and New Jersey an offshore wind zone. Not getting enough attention because of the other stories I've been covering, but yeah, the Biden administration announced a plan Monday to vastly expand the use of offshore wind power along the East Coast, aiming to tap a potentially huge source of renewable energy that has so far struggled to gain a foothold in the United States, writing Lisa Friedman and Brad Plumer, who are great reporters at the New York Times. Yeah, these wind turbines, offshore wind turbines, are supposed to generate enough power for 10 million homes. Here is Jen Psaki announcing it today at the White House press briefing.
Today, the White House convened leaders from across the administration and is taking coordinated steps to announce a set of bold actions that will catalyze offshore wind energy and create good-paying union jobs. The president recognizes that a thriving offshore wind industry will drive new jobs and economic opportunity up and down the Atlantic coast, in the Gulf of Mexico, and in Pacific waters. We just released a fact sheet on this announcement, pretty detailed. The Department of Interior, Energy and Commerce announced a shared goal to deploy 30 gigawatts of offshore wind in the United States by 2030, while protecting biodiversity and protecting ocean co-use. Meeting this target will trigger more than $12 billion per year in capital investment in projects on both U.S. coasts, create tens of thousands of good-paying union jobs, with more than 44,000 workers employed in offshore wind by 2030, and nearly 33,000 additional jobs in communities supported by offshore wind activity.
All right. Well, that is all I have for you for the last 24 hours, at least in terms of politics and COVID and now the Derek Chauvin trial that we're going to hear a lot about. I got to pick a pronunciation. Derek Chauvin. Derek Chauvin. That's how I'm going to say it, not Chauvin. Who the hell is he? Some kind of French aristocrat? No, he is a murderer. We're going to hear a lot more about that. But now it's time for everything else that didn't get covered or everything else that I've got on my clipboard, everything that's left. It's time for the news dump. And another news dump jingle from listener Pete Coe. I'll listen to it for the first time along with you.
Ravenous raccoon inside steals your baby's lunch. It's got your father cornered on today's news dump.
The raccoon has the baby cornered? Wow, it's ravenous. That is crazy. You know, I love raccoons, by the way. I found 2 baby raccoons who I think their mother was killed. My buddy Alex and I found them when we were young, and we brought them home and took care of them for a couple days, and then we turned them into like an animal sanctuary, and I still feel good about that. They were so cute, little baby raccoons. And then last year, I drove over one and killed it. Anyway, here is the news dump. All right, let's start with a Gallup poll, a new Gallup poll I saw that says U.S. church membership has fallen below majority for the first time. Americans' membership in houses of worship continued to decline last year, dropping below 50% for the first time in Gallup's 8-decade trend. In 2020, 47% of U.S. adults belong to a church, synagogue, or mosque, down more than 20 points from the turn of the century. Change is primarily apparently due to a rise in Americans with no religious preference. Isn't that why we have all of the problems that we do? Because people aren't going to their chosen house of worship? Isn't it those of us that don't believe in the magic man in the sky and the afterlife and all that comes with it? Isn't that why we're seeing so much corruption, the character and soul of America? Nah, it's not why. I think it's a good thing, actually. I think it means that we are learning more about science and reason and philosophy. There was a time and place for the church, and that time and place, in my opinion, is over. Those of you who are religious and find great things about your religion and your church and your community, awesome. I'm very happy for you. Many of you are much better people than I am, for sure. Thinking of you, Vicky. But there are those of us who aren't, and we shouldn't be demonized either. And I think this is a really interesting and I think important trend. But enough about my opinions on religion. All right, how about this? Billions of cicadas are soon to emerge from underground. I love this. Swarms of cicadas, part of a group called Brood X, are expected to appear in 18 states in the next few weeks, just in time to help orchestrate the soundtrack of summer. I like this from the New York Times. Jesus Jimenez, who writes, a few months of quarantine during the coronavirus pandemic, that's nothing for a swarm of cicadas that have been underground since 2004. Such a cool thing. 17 years that they wait underground before they emerge. Does anybody ever just dig one up? You're digging a hole to plant a bush or a tree. Oh, by the way, anybody who knows about that, planting holes and planting bushes and trees, I'm about to do that. So send me some help. Yeah, email me, standupwithpete@gmail.com. Anyway, the cicadas, that's cool. Unless you're afraid of bugs, which is your problem. They're just as cool and awesome as we are and part of nature. Unless they're mosquitoes. Mosquitoes are assholes. So are murder hornets. How about this story? Scholastic book publisher pulled a book by the author of Captain Underpants, a guy named Dave Pilkey, because apparently it had harmful racial stereotypes. The Adventures of Ook and Glook, I guess it's called, published in 2010, served as a spin-off from his popular Captain Underpants children's series. You know, how about, he should have pulled Captain Underpants. That sounds kind of creepy. I've heard of that before, but I never read that to my kids. Is that good? Apparently, the two main characters in Ook and Glook, that sounds a lot like Gook. by the way. So you're already off to a bad start. I'm just going to go ahead and say it. But apparently the two main characters from this are trying to clear up science facts with a story about the time-traveling cavemen who train at Master Wong's School of Kung Fu. Anyway, Dave Pilkey is the author, and he said he'd created the book to showcase diversity, equality, and nonviolent conflict resolution using principles found in Chinese philosophy, but apparently he recently had been alerted that it also contains harmful racial stereotypes and passively racist imagery. So he apologized for it and said it was wrong and harmful to his Asian readers, friends, family, and all Asian people, and begged forgiveness and pledged to do better. So I guess that's good. I don't know. I mean, people are going to talk about political correctness and cancel culture, but the truth is when humans evolve, when we learn that something that we did, or in my case, joked about in my stand-up comedy act, was somehow hurtful or no longer helpful or not funny, then fine. That's what's important. That's growing and maturing and evolving, in my case, as a man. And sounds like the same issue with this author and illustrator, Dave Pilkey. Well, here's some good news. We're not going to have an Armageddon. Well, at least not from an asteroid. NASA said that Earth is safe from an asteroid for 100 years. Specifically, the asteroid that's 1,100 feet long. Going to fly by, it's called Apophis. Going to fly by Earth on April 13, 2029, at just under 20,000 miles above the surface. And it will be visible without binoculars or telescopes. But I guess we're going to have to wait 8 years for that. But yeah, the point is Earth is safe from a potential calamity-causing asteroid for the next 100 years, NASA announced on Friday. Scientists said if an asteroid did hit Earth in about 100 years, it would really just hit a giant desert, a big dusty rock because of climate change. All right, I might be exaggerating. That might be a little hyperbolic. And on Wall Street, Dow's reached a record to start the week. Index rise nearly 100 points. Stocks wobble in the morning, but stabilize in afternoon trading on Monday. The Dow rose 98 points to a record 33,171, while the S&P 500 fell 3 points to 39.71, and the NASDAQ fell 79 points to 13,059. Let's go to California, where wildlife officials are worried about a strange ailment that appears to strip young bears of their fear of humans and is also causing fatal brain inflammation. Yeesh. Cases have been turning up in the state since 2014, including 4 in the last year, according to CBS Sacramento. Wow, I think we need a news dump about young bears that are not afraid of humans. How about that one, Pete? All right, that's it. That's the news dump. That's the entire news. Holy shit, I can't even believe I did almost 40 minutes of news. Who has time for all that? I'm sorry. Plus, I still have 2 amazing conversations. I hope you skip around, and if not, I hope you appreciate the whole thing, and I'm so happy to have you. My first guest joining me is one of my favorite people to talk to. He is always so good in our conversation. He's a journalist, a writer, a lawyer, an award-winning playwright, a TV host. He's been a consultant to the U.S. State Department. He was a contributor for a long time to the New York Times, to CNN, now the Daily Beast. He also has a new book coming out, and he is a really great TED Talk that you should watch. He's on Twitter, where he's a beast, a monster, and I always love talking to Wajahat Ali. I do every other week or so. He's on Twitter at Wajahat Ali. Grew up in California, and just one of my favorite people. Here is my latest, and then after that, Aaron David Miller. So let's do it, shall we? Ladies and gentlemen, there he is, Wajahat Ali. It's so good to see you. I have so many things to talk with you and have fun with you about. Hi.
I'm here to defend my left-handed people from the scourge of your tyranny and all good people, faithful, patriotic Americans who love butter. I'm here for you.
Can you be, this all took place on Twitter, there's a lot of accusations flying around the other night, but can you be anti or a self-hating left-handed person? I mean, I'm kind of ambidextrous, but I am left-handed. I write with my left hand.
I think right supremacy, it kind of creates a self-loathing amongst left-handed people. So you can, I think you can. I think you could be a self-loathing southpaw who desperately tries to assimilate into right-handedness. It is possible.
And what I want to ask you before we get into all these serious issues, just real quick, I haven't talked much about Trump. I'm not playing his voice on the podcast, and though I did see that you tweeted about this, and I wanted to just have fun with it because I hadn't talked to anybody. Somebody had a wedding at Mar-a-Lago, his place in Florida, where I guess he lives, and he showed up at the wedding in his tuxedo and so on. Do you think he was just walking through? Was he invited? Does he automatically get invited? And at the wedding, he started griping about Joe Biden and the election. And what are your thoughts on that moment and for that couple? I mean, they must like him. They had their wedding at his place.
It's the worst. It's like the worst sequel to Wedding Crashers. It's like, it's like they couldn't get Owen Wilson and Vince Vaughn to reprise the role, so they get Donald Trump. He's got time. He just strolls in. He goes, "Everybody, listen. I want to thank the couples. What's their name? Whatever. Listen, I should be president. I should not be here right now, but still, I'm here. Give me a Diet Coke." And he just rants apparently about how he should have won. And I think if you're like his fan, you're like, it's like Elvis appearing, right? Like it's like the drunk, bloated Elvis. Does he have to sing the tunes? He can just warble and like he can urinate on himself, but you're just happy. You're like, drunk Elvis came to my party. Yeah. And their family members like, "Did you see the urine?" Like, I smelled it, bro. I smelled it. It was amazing. That's how they're going to be for the rest of their lives.
That is, yeah, absolutely. They're always going to be that couple. And there are several others, apparently, where he just showed up at their wedding because they were having it at his different resorts, where they look back at their wedding and Donald Trump just showed up all
sweaty and bloated and paranoid.
Warbling.
Warbling. Because apparently Bill Murray does this. Bill Murray has all these amazing stories where he just interacts with regular people. And goes to their proms, like goes to eat. But that's entertaining.
Hey, Bill Murray's not griping about his roles that he desperately wanted going to Tom Hanks.
Yeah, he's just
and if he does, great.
He goes, "Castaway." Yeah, Tom was good in that one. Tom was good in Castaway. I got Scrooged. But like, I think it's like, he's so pathetic. Like I was just thinking about this right now, right before you start to press record, because Biden apparently said that 90% of American adults, right, above the age of 16 are going to get like vaccinated soon. And I was just thinking, like, my God, can you imagine if Trump was still our president during this pandemic? And I was just like, a little prayer came from my heart, right? I mean, Biden, Democrats have their weaknesses. Of course, we're not going to sit there and like, be propagandists for the Democrats, but like, there's a man right now who was president for 4 years who's literally crashing weddings, complaining about his failed job. And then there's another president and his administration who are literally helping Americans get vaccinated during a pandemic. Man.
What do you think of the segment of the population that is apparently in polling and in actuality refusing to get the vaccine? And those are like Republican men or Trump supporting men, white men over maybe a certain age. I'm not sure how much the age has to do with it, but it's white guys who are conservative Republicans are not getting the vaccine. What do you say about it? What do you think of those guys? What's going to happen with them? Why are they not getting the vaccine? I mean, their dear leader got it.
So look, there's two, I think, communities. The first one you identified, right? A lot of Republicans, specifically according to the data, but also a lot of black men and women, right? Black men and women, it's because they're not afraid of needles, they're not afraid of vaccines, they're afraid of what white supremacy and the United States government has done to them through medical testing. That's why there is a hesitancy, right? That's why they need black and people of color doctors to say, no, this is real, is because of the massive trust deficit with the government. Okay, that's number one. So why are all these white Americans in white America so disturbed about the vaccines? Is because for the past year, there has been a concentrated disinformation effort by right-wing sources that have not been part of the mainstream sources that say, if you get the vaccine, they'll control you. If they get the vaccine, Bill Gates will plant a chip and he's part of the deep state. And the hypocrisy is you see this fear of the government on Fox News, specifically Tucker Carlson, but these mother effers are the first one to sign up and get the vaccine. So who got the vaccine? Rupert Murdoch, one of the earliest people, but yet on his network, Fox News, he lets these anchors mislead American people during a pandemic. And so, look, man, I feel like there's going to be a third of this. I keep saying this on your show. I don't think we're going to win over a third of this country. And about a third of this country doesn't want to get the vaccine. And so the question then is, how do we incentivize them to get the vaccine? Do you give them money? Maybe. Or do you do what like we do with our kids at school? If you ain't going to get the flu shot, your kid ain't going to go to school. Like, if your kid doesn't get the shots and you haven't proven, you're not going to come inside.
But I just don't see that happening in these red states where they would have to enforce those. I mean, you're going to make those national laws. I mean, maybe to travel nationally, or but I feel like that would be the kind of thing state by state as the ideology also spreads. I mean, do they think, by the way, that getting vaccinated, it means I'm a pussy?
Some of them do. I think some of this is like a machismo thing. Because come from their comments, right? You said like we laugh about it, but read the comments of some of these people. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid of no damn virus. I'm American. Ugh. And you're like, yo, the virus doesn't care about the size of your small penis. Like, the virus will kill anybody. The virus does not care. It will attack mercilessly. If you're unlucky, you can be young and still get killed. I do think and if you look at the data, there is this strange machismo factor in Trump supporters, right? Like this deep-seated fear that they'll lose their masculinity. It goes back to like Dr. Strangelove. If you've ever seen that classic movie where the colonel who loses his mind, right, and starts the nuclear war, thinks that the communists are going to steal his precious fluids. It's the same. It's like the same paranoid fear. They'll come for my manhood, my fluids. They'll come get us. They'll weaken us. The deep state, the Jews, the Muslims, the Latinos. And meanwhile, we are like, this is why I hate this both sides nonsense. I'm like, yo, I want you to live. Just get the damn vaccine. I want my kids to live. And they're going to just be a pain in the ass for America moving forward.
I wanted to ask you about this announcement. I know that you saw that happened. CDC Director Dr. Rochelle Walensky, while we're talking about COVID and vaccines, went off script with an emotional plea to the public about impending doom following a rise in COVID cases. And she said she's scared. Did you see this? What is she talking about? What is why is she so concerned right now?
I'm so glad she said that. And I sent that message to a bunch of my friends. I was talking to my wife about this yesterday because it was the weekend, right? And I'm like, yo, I think people just have assumed that coronavirus has disappeared. And we're still waiting for the data to find out like how effective being double vaccinated is, single vaccinated. Can you still be a carrier? Can you still infect others? We still don't know, right? And not everyone's been vaccinated so far. So I think what she's seeing is this alarming trend of spring break where literally people are just give 0 Fs now. And they're like, I got my shot. And then I see some people, I won't name them on Twitter, who are like, God, there's otherwise a smart person who's a writer for The Atlantic saying, I'm tired of people shaming other people. Go live your life. And I'm like, what the hell are you talking about, man? Not everyone has a vaccine. We're still waiting for data. And she's seeing the trends, especially as the sun is out, spring, summer. People are getting tired. People are like, I'm vaccinated. Even I have friends now saying, we're hanging out. We didn't wear a mask. We're going to brunch. We're eating inside a restaurant. And I'm like, why are you doing this? Just take it back. Take it a step back, because people are still dying. People are still getting infected, and she's waiting for apparently a variant that's going to strike because people have let their guard down. If we just wait a couple of months, I think we'll be in the clear. But again, like I said, I feel like we're watching 10 Commandments where Charlton Heston as Moses is like, can you just wait 40 days? And then Edward G. Robinson is like, man, Moses is a fraud. He's been gone. Let's take a golden calf for worship.
I love that voice.
And then Moses comes down and he goes, mother effers, I just said 40 days, right? So
I'm with you. I'm absolutely with you. But I know a lot of people aren't. The issue around shaming, the whole thing has been really challenging for us to get along with people that we care about and don't share some of the same values around. But that to see her today become emotional like that was really disconcerting. All right, I want to ask you about the trial of Derek Chauvin or Chauvin. Does it matter?
She doesn't even care.
The killing of George Floyd began yesterday. Right. That's when we're taping. You see what I did? And he's charged with second degree murder, third degree murder. And the jury's 9 of 15 are white, expected to take about 4 weeks. Courthouse is surrounded by apparently concrete barriers and razor wire wire. And of course, it's being televised because normally they would allow reporters in and they would allow journalists in. But the judge in this case decided because it was such an important case and they didn't want people coming in because of COVID, they would actually televise it. So now this trial it will be really huge. How big do you think it's going to be? That it's going to be televised? I mean, all the networks are going to televise it and have commentary about it, right? I mean, what do you see happening over the next 4 weeks with the nation just paying attention to this? It's going to be a real flashpoint in racial history.
Flashpoint,
perhaps more than anything since Rodney King.
Yeah, let's not forget, because last year during a pandemic, a record amount of Americans came out to protest the the murder of George Floyd, right? It was like anywhere from 15 to 22 million. It broke the previous record of the Women's March, which at that time was the single largest demonstration, right? So the fact that people came out, and so many different people, so many different allies came out just appalled by this video, right? It's not even 8 minutes, 46 seconds. Apparently now they said it's like 9 minutes, right? I tweeted this out right before I came on your show. My fear is it's so impossible, nearly impossible to prosecute cops in this country, right, with the police immunity. And all you need to do is convince one of the jury members, and just maybe, what happens if he gets acquitted, or what happens if he gets a slap on the wrist? And I feel like the powder keg, like you said, the rise of white nationalism, the mainstreaming of racism and white nationalism, the double standards, the fact that Kyle Rittenhouse, a man who killed 2 innocent people during a BLM protest, remember that, is made into a hero. Yeah. The McCloskeys who took out their guns at black peaceful protesters that were crossing their house, they're made into heroes. The fact that Donald Trump said to Proud Boys, stand back and stand by, and the fact that people who actually did kill people and took over the U.S. Capitol just 2 months ago are seen as heroes. Either way, this comes out. It's going to be used as fuel and literal ammunition by bad faith actors. And I hope it comes out on the side of justice, but I am very wary. I'm very wary.
I can't imagine how it doesn't. I mean, but I'm trying to decide kind of how much I'm going to talk about it here, but there's going to be so many great shows covering it with great commentary. I'm just not sure how much to even talk about it, but it's definitely going to happen for the next, 4 weeks for sure. I mean, this case that's going to be unfolding. But
what it could do is, I hope, this is the problem, right? We want change to happen immediately, but cases like this push things forward. And so, the fact that I hope more and more people talk about, why do police have immunity, so much immunity? Is it right for a cop to kneel and kill a man? Why does this keep happening to black people, right? And I think the murder of George Floyd last year, what I've heard from many white friends and allies, suburban moms in the Midwest, said, I never thought about this before. I never thought about white supremacy. I never thought about police brutality. I thought they were all just gangbangers and thugs, right? Yeah. I think if that can continue this conversation that we're having finally in this country, and it could keep it alive and not just make it like a flash in the pan, which is the fear of all of us, right? Last year, that it'd be a moment and that moment would pass. That could be something beneficial. But with this country, the way it is, where literally you have Paul Gosar, a Republican who just spoke at a white supremacist conference, and Marjorie Taylor Greene, right, as mainstream Republicans who are supported by other Republican leaders. I mean, you used to have people, man, back in the day in Rodney King's time, that, let us be sober about this. What happens if there's no sobriety from the other side?
Great questions, all of them. The thing that concerns me the most is this recent data, and I have heard it now coming out from different analysis and polls, where white conservative folks think that they are more discriminated against than who we traditionally think of as marginalized communities, gender, race, and minority religions. White Christian, I think, Americans think they have it hard. They are more discriminated. It's tougher for them. And I think about that all the time. I think about how I can convince those people that that's not the case, being one of the whites. What do you think?
I don't think you can, man. I don't think you can. I remember this has been coming out consistently. NPR did a poll just a couple of years ago, which I've cited on your show, which said that in their poll, 57 to 58% of whites thought they are the most aggrieved victims, right? And now the latest poll that you showed, the latest data says, like, the number just jumps up when it comes to these predominantly white conservatives. This is age-old history of the United States of America. I mean, when the Civil War was happening, the Southern whites thought they were more victimized than blacks. When there was Reconstruction, they said, what will happen to us? The greatest articulation of this, and I think all Americans should see this movie, is Birth of a Nation, directed by D.W. Griffith, which was based off of white supremacist narratives, like novels by Thomas Dixon, The Klansman, and others. And it just shows you this, it just encapsulates white fear and white anxiety, right? It shows you what happens after the Civil War, and all of a sudden, black people are allowed to, in the state assembly, and then they take over and they take off their boots and they put their legs on the table and they eat fried chicken off the bone. And then a white woman comes in the balcony, and all of them at once look up at the white woman and the white man, and there's like an iris around them, and they're trapped, and then they have to leave. And the movie ends with these black people suddenly have their freedom. What do? They decide to rape the white women, and then the Ku Klux Klan rises again and saves them, right? It's a perfect encapsulation of the fear that's happening right now in the 21st century. Equality is oppression if you've been in power your whole life, right? And so just because there's some equality now, these aggrieved whites are like, we are oppressed. Whereas the rest of us are like, no, you guys are still in power. Don't worry. It's good to be a white man. It's just that a few of us are getting a seat at the table. And I don't think you can reduce this white anxiety in about a third of this country. I think you can peel off a few, Pete. But I think this is the same fears that motivated the Civil War, Reconstruction, Jim Crow, segregation, Southern strategy, and voila, we're in the 21st century.
Apparently, though, I will say one thing about the poll. It says that all the people polled are older Major League Baseball pitchers.
Named Kurt Schilling.
Just white guys that are clearly being replaced by brown pitchers. They're pretty,
I mean, can you imagine the MLB if
Rally Fingers is really worked up about some of the immigration issues he's seeing from Cuba.
I can't do the curveball anymore. I got a Haitian I'm competing with. These Haitians with their curveballs, these Dominicans.
Are there any Haitian Major League players? I feel like it's not a huge sport in Haiti, right next door. However, in the DR, anyway, we can differentiate.
But the thing is that this is going to be the death rattle of white supremacy, man. And people say it's old people. This is what people haven't. This is the scary part, man. Everyone says, "Oh, it's the old people; they'll die off." No, we're also seeing the young whites. When it comes to race, they're statistically tied in their attitudes with the elders, right? Climate change different, same-sex marriage, marriage equality different, or gender issues different. But when it comes to race, this thing is generational, and they're picking off the youth, man. Alt-right, they're going after young white single men, right? Proud Boys, usually young white single men, right? This guy, Nick Fuentes, 21-year-old white supremacist, the guy who organized that rally where Paul Gosar spoke. So I don't want people to keep their eye off the ball. A lot of people get lazy. The old whites still die. The young whites will come and be woke.
Yeah.
Not on race, buddy. You got to do work.
Speaking of the other really huge issue that it's hard to look away from, and we shouldn't, I should say. We should not look away from this. Everybody has to get involved. There will be lawsuits. And now news today, Georgia's voting restrictions are catching on. Florida Republicans are now considering a bill that would effectively make it a crime to give voters food or drink, including water, within 150 feet of polling places. Greg Sargent tweeting, "No end to it. Florida Republicans are now considering a measure that would restrict passing food and drinks to people in voting lines. Republicans sure seem convinced that voter suppression is in their party's interest." Mark Elias tweets, "It appears that Florida Republicans have looked at the outrage aimed at Georgia's suppression law with envy rather than disgust."
Yeah, absolutely. Why is anyone surprised? White supremacy, just like before, just like today, right? Republicans have realized after the post-2012 autopsy that they did, that they do no longer want to court the majority of Americans. They don't even want to be the party of ideas. Look at 2020, the GOP, right? The Republican National Convention. No platform. It was just whatever Trump wanted. So they realized that they're going to court white anger and they're going to do voter suppression and gerrymandering all out. Well, who's going to stop them, right? And so now you have naked, shameless bills coming out, more than 250, that are just literally surgically going after black voters, the base of the Democratic Party, but also pretty much most voters, right? And they're like, if we could suppress enough votes and we have gerrymandering and we get the white vote out, we can win. Steve Bannon openly admitted it 4 years ago. He says, with just 40%, we'll rule for the next 40 years. That's all we need. I'm not interested in winning over, all the rest of them folks. I just need enough whites to come out, pilfer out a few black voters and a few Latino men, and then voter suppress and gerrymander, and we rule for the next 40 years. That's what they're trying to do. And so again, I come to the point of ending the filibuster. Absent ending the filibuster, how will Democrats win in 2022 when they're facing massive voter suppression, gerrymandering, an unfavorable map in the House, and history, which says that most people switch parties, right? They want to give some control. So with Democrats in the control of the White House, historically, maybe they'll go to the Republicans, right? But the optimist in me and says Republicans are also playing with fire.
Yeah.
That's the optimist in me, because they're assuming the rest of us will just sit there and take it. I don't think people will, man. And that's my hope, is that if we can get our shit together and organize, and if Democrats weaken the filibuster to the point where you can try to get this Voting Rights Act and the For the People Act, maybe, just maybe, we could get this done. But this is scary stuff, man. This is their full-scale assault on democracy. And like I've said on your show again and again and again for the past 4 years, Republicans are further going to radicalize and weaponize. And as David Frum said, and I agree with him, if it's between conservatism or democracy, they're going to give up democracy.
Yeah, you shared that clip. I know you saw it, where the guy was on the Tucker Carlson show, and he said, I'm afraid we're going to see the right turn to fascism in 10 years. I'm like, yeah, you did like years ago. Number one, you've been fascist for a long time, but hearing that conversation was...
You forced me to be a fascist. You forced me to be a racist.
That's what they were saying.
You forced me to be a misogynist, right?
Right.
And the scary thing, I'm glad you brought that up, because that's a disturbing as F clip that should be played nonstop.
Yeah, I debated whether or not I should share it. I think I did on the podcast, because I thought it was... Why do you think it's important?
Because it's an open admission about where the Republican Party is going.
Mm-hmm.
Can you imagine if on, say, MSNBC or Pete Dominic's show or CNN, you and I came on and said, they're forcing me to be a fascist. We're going to be fascists in 5 years, and the entire liberal movement is going to be a fascist movement. Are you kidding me? What will the right wing do with that? They think they're apparently worried about Antifa, and they're apparently worried about mobs and Black Lives Matter. They're openly telling you that we are going to be fascists, and Tucker Carlson entertained it, and it kind of just was a blip on the radar. They're telling you what's going to happen, and they're rationalizing it. And we just had the overthrow, or the attempted overthrow, of a Democratic election just 2 months ago, man. February, March, 2.5 months ago. And so that's my fear. My fear is Americans are a forgetful people, and 2022 is just a year and a half around the corner. People are going to forget that Biden helped reopen America, vaccinated America, gave people stimulus checks, and they're going to run on fear. They're going to run on immigration. They're going to run on invaders. They're going to run on cancel culture, and they're going to suppress votes. And the rest of America, the media is going to fail and do both sides, which they still do. And they're going to both sides fascism into our country.
Who do you think, can you, top of mind, call out somebody that does that kind of both sides thing?
Todd did it, man. Todd did it just yesterday with Meet the Press.
Chuck Todd,
with the gun control.
Yeah.
He just like openly goes, and then I'll just tell you, we've talked about this. This is how media works. They're trained this way, but also the bottom line is ratings and clicks, and it's incestuous. They're friends with these people, right? And this is where media has to be just super aggressive now. Like, are you on the side of democracy, or are you on the side of ratings on both sides? If you're on the side of ratings on both sides, continue. If you're on the side of democracy, you gotta put a stake in the ground.
I want to talk to you about the other two big issues that are getting a lot of attention right now and get your perspective on them. One is what's happening at our southern border. It's a really difficult issue, and I think that people try to put it in this very partisan box. Republicans' policies this, Democratic policies that, liberal conservative. What Trump did, a Biden administration is clearly looking at the past 4 years. I don't like it. I get why they're doing it, but the truth is this has been going on forever. I think the most important point to make whenever we're talking about immigration, because I'm old enough to remember it because I covered it Sirius XM, was that the United States Senate had comprehensive immigration reform bill passed out of the Senate that we now look at, which is intransigent. You can't get anything out. No, they had enough votes, and they sent it to the House. John Boehner was the speaker at the time. He did not take it up for a vote. Why? Because he was concerned it would pass and it would become the law and they wouldn't have immigration as a wedge issue. This is a really important point. Comprehensive immigration reform bill was billions and billions of dollars in security. It was a wish list of security for Republican conservatives. That's how they got the votes from the Senate. And it was all of the other things, normalization, the Dreamers and so on, that liberals wanted. It passed. That's the most important point. Speaking of both sides when it comes to immigration, don't talk to me about Trump. Let's go way further back to look at what the issue is.
Rubio, talk to Rubio about it. What happened, Rubio? I thought you were part of the bipartisan Gang of Eight, right? What happened, Republicans? And so my fear, and I said this on another podcast, is that immigration reform. I'm polyamorous with podcasts.
More Waj, the better.
Immigration reform is going to get punted. It always gets punted. It's going to get punted to satiate white anxiety and cultural anxiety. You've already seen that the terrible journalism around the quote unquote surge, which is not a surge at the border, has already depressed Americans' appetite for immigration reform. That includes Democrats, right? That was a Republican talking point laundered through Washington Post. There is no surge. This is seasonal, guys. This is a seasonal uptick. There's nothing abnormal about it. The surge happened in 2019 under Trump's leadership. The zero tolerance policy was cruel and ineffective. And now that America's slightly reopening, right now you're seeing some people come, but it's averaged out. It's seasonal. There's nothing remarkable or unique about this. Also, unless you take on immigration reform in a serious manner, this is going to keep happening. Unless you talk about foreign policy and economic investment in Central America, right? You won't get to the bottom of this. People don't like leaving their homes and everything just to cross the border and maybe die and maybe, surrender themselves to a cruel country that now no longer that has reduced asylum.
I think that's mostly true.
Prison them and kidnap them and separate their children.
I think that's mostly true, but I want to push back on it because I keep hearing people say people don't want to leave their countries. Yeah, they do. People do want to leave their countries to come to America because America is a way better place. People often want to leave a place that they know, even though they're comfortable, to go to a new place. We do it. We all do. We move all over this country because we think that place is better. I do think a lot of people want to come to America because it's better than
better than where they are, right? Exactly.
Yeah, that's not controversial, and it shouldn't be. And we should talk about, as you mentioned, some kind of reforms that make that work so that they don't necessarily. I mean, I'm not going to explain the immigration reforms at work, but the truth is a lot of people just do want to come here because it's better. And so we have to figure out how to make it work.
And we have to figure out how to make it work. And we also have to figure out what to do with 11 million undocumented people in this country that we rely upon, who's without their labor, this country would fall apart. Yep. And 4 million of whom are minors. And so what type of country are we that we're punishing minors and at least not giving them a pathway towards some legal status?
They all work in coal mines?
Yeah. Like,
that's what I heard.
Yeah,
I was like, that many undocumented people are all minors? Wow.
And so the hypocrisy of this country and how it deals with its own immigrant population, including the undocumented, has to be negotiated, debated, challenged, right? Yep. Because even in these countries like Steve King, the former white supremacist, still white supremacist from Iowa, right? Like his district, they're openly saying, once the Mexican labor is left, it's hurt our country's economy. Right. Like, and everyone's talking about the population. We need more population. Well, thanks to immigrants, you'll get it. Otherwise, now the total fertility rate of America has dipped down to like 1.7 and everyone's freaking out. Well, you need immigrants.
We do, but why not? Why can't we make a special channel path for more Norwegians, Swedes, the Finns, Scandinavians?
The Vikings, right?
Yes.
Vikings. So, I mean, this is what this is. And people think this is new. This is nothing new. This has happened since the beginning of America, right? Even during the 1965 Immigration Nationality Act, which helped my father come, right? At that time, white anxiety of the Democrats and Republicans, the fear was we'll be swarmed by the Asiatic brown people, right? They'll take over. And so there were all these restrictions, even at that time. And the restriction was that they wanted to stop Mexican laborers. And the irony is that the quotas that they put on Mexican laborers, who were coming here, by the way, right? Doing our work. That's what increased, irony, undocumented immigrants. So it's one of those things where you have to tackle it boldly, tackle it well. Democrats need to take the lead. But my fear is, with this dysfunctional Congress, with white anxiety, with racism, with nativism, with the talking point that's very successful right now, as you have bloated Ted Cruz saying, with these like commando rejects coming, him and Lindsey Graham pointing at the wall, right? It wins, man. And so what are Democrats going to do? This is what they're going to say. We're going to jam through stimulus. We're going to reopen America, and maybe we might get through infrastructure. And that's all the appetite we got, because we got 2022 coming. We're going to punt immigration reform, and we're going to see the cruelty continue.
Yeah, we'll see. It'll be hard for them to do that if we keep hearing these headlines. But just to be clear, every special interest, as far as I have looked into this, is for comprehensive immigration reform. Yep. The traditional conservative interests, like the religious right, they want them, except for the racist ones. Of course, obviously they don't. But certainly the agricultural industry, the chambers of commerce, all these,
George W. Bush.
For sure, yes, because of all the reasons you mentioned. But just to be clear, it's just the wedge issue that it is, and just the racism, and just, Ted Cruz during Trump not saying a word about these people at the border. And then as soon as Biden comes in, he goes down there and like, look at them. Look at the way they are. It's
look at the inhumanity, the hypocrisy. And my hope is the hypocrisy is so stunning for enough people that they say, you don't care. Republicans, you were fine kidnapping kids and putting them in cages. We remember. Right. And so that's my hope, man. But again, we're dealing with a right-wing ecosystem that is just in sync, that is incestuous, that commandeers the imagination of about a third of this country, where the same talking points are repeated on Fox News, talk radio, podcast, websites. We're up against that, man.
Yeah, it's hard to be up against that. That's why I'm glad that you always talk with me. And I just wanted to ask you one final question about guns. The gun issue, obviously, back. There's been like a mass shooting like every day, seemingly. And this last guy apparently was a Muslim. And it was interesting to see what happened on social media as a result, seeing you get pounced upon for, you can take it from there. But what do you think about guns? What was the reaction to that last shooting? The Boulder shooting?
Man, my whole thing was this is an American problem which needs an American solution, and if anything, people should.
It's a male problem.
Yeah, people should celebrate that people of color have integrated in America, and one of the signs of integration is that we've become mass shooters. I know that's dark humor, but it's a male problem. It's a problem that affects America. It's a sickness everywhere I've traveled. Every country I've traveled, one of the top 3 questions I always get asked about America is, guns, why? Like, no one gets this. And it was interesting. I wrote an article for the Daily Beast about this, where, the killer in Atlanta, a young white man, 21 years old, just like the Arab American individual who killed people in Boulder. And for the killer in Atlanta, at least it was pretty clear from his own admission that he wanted to remove temptation. So he targeted Asian American women who work at spas and parlors, and he used to be connected to a Southern Baptist church, had these posts. He used to bring the Bible to school every day. So it seems that religion played a part. White Christian killer. Christian didn't trend. What trended after it was revealed, just the identity was revealed of the Boulder killer, right? That he was from a Syrian American family. And his brother said, not too religious, not too political. Islamic trended. He's Muslim trended, right? Because the right wing, all of a sudden, that day decided to care about his identity. The night before, Pete, when everyone thought he was white, guess what Fox News did? Did not cover the Boulder hearing. Instead, they covered Joe Biden tripping on the stairs of Air Force One. So who's playing identity politics?
Finally, your book is out, or is not out. But the news about your book is that it is officially done. It's turned in. Is that the deal?
They accepted it for publication.
I don't write books. I don't know what that means.
That means it'll come out, hopefully, knock on wood, January 2022. I got to do some of the edits and the proofs. Just submitted the notes yesterday and the acknowledgments. And then we're going to give it another read through, correct anything. Then I'm going to send it to people for review blurbs. I'm going to send it to Pete to be my token white guy to tell me how he feels about the book. Hopefully get some blurbage. And then from now on, man, from April to January, apparently it's systems go. I had no idea. It's the first time writing a book. So you got to start prepping for the release now.
Well, there's going to be a real competition to want to blurb this book because everybody loves Waj. And so you're going to get some very high profile people.
I don't know, bro. I hope so. It's, it's one of those things where everyone's busy. And I feel like,
you're going to stop with you'll see. You'll see. It's going to be a big deal, and I can't wait to read. What's the working title, or is that a settled?
Go back to where you came from and other helpful recommendations on how to become American.
I love it.
And they accepted the entire title, which I love.
So great.
It's like 16-word title. I love it.
Great. Well, I'm just going to keep hyping it up, and I'm very excited about that.
Thanks,
and always excited to talk to you. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, sir.
There he goes, Wajahat Ali, everybody. Follow him on Twitter, read him at the Daily Beast, and very excited about his new book. Okay, now I've got a second guest, as I always do, and he is such a great guy to talk to all the time. He's a global affairs analyst for CNN. He is a senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. He is a foreign policy expert. He's written 5 books. His most recent is The End of Greatness, Why America Can't Have and Doesn't Want Another Great President. Between 1978 and 2003, Aaron David Miller served at the State Department as a historian, analyst, negotiator, and advisor to both Republican and Democratic secretaries of state, where he helped formulate U.S. policy on the Middle East and the Arab-Israeli peace process. He's a great interview, a member of a council on foreign relations. I always love talking to him, and we have great conversations. He has a lot to say about a lot of things. We talked about domestic politics influencing foreign policy. We talked about the Israeli election. We talked about the fact that we can't even agree on scientific truth anymore, and much, much more. I'm so happy to have Aaron David Miller back on the show, and here is our conversation. There he is, Aaron David Miller, who has just received a 10 out of 10 on Room Rater. And I agree with him. You do have a lovely space there. Maybe I'll just share a screenshot or some of the video here. A lovely home office, Aaron David Miller. Congratulations.
Thanks. And during the time of the COVID, I'm recommending if I never got back to an office, it would be too soon.
Yeah, you don't miss it, huh? You're one of those?
I really don't.
Me neither.
I mean, part of the reason is that, it's day before yesterday was my birthday, right?
Hey.
So I'm 70. I can't even believe it. Lindsay put a big block 7 and 2 on my giant birthday cake, which was delicious. Giant food birthday cake. Wow. Advertisement for Giant. It's better than any of the fancy cakes.
Wow.
That's the local grocery store, right? I mean, I don't know if they have Giants where you guys are.
We don't have, but grocery store cake is cake, but 72, happy birthday. I can't believe it.
As my kids keep reminding me, Dad, particularly with respect to the internet and those kinds of things, you fall farther and farther behind every day.
Well, in regards to that, as you look back at your long career, an expert as a foreign policy guy, formerly a historian, as a matter of fact, in your long life, looking at foreign policy, I can't imagine that you would disagree with the statement. It is far more complicated now with cyber and so much more social media than it was most of your career.
Yeah, there's no question about that. Everything is more complicated. I remember in the old days, in the 80s, 70s and 80s, that the most important thing we did at the Department of State every morning was to read the New York Times and Washington Post, because the press, the secretary's press spokesman or woman basically needed to be prepped. Well, it was fine because the media was more or less dead space, with the exception of CNN that started broadcast. So you could relatively predict that people would not be informed by noon of some new breaking development. Now it's minute by minute. Well, the previous administration it was just tsunamis of things that largely, again, having voted for Republicans and Democrats and worked for them, a lot of the noise in the last 4 years was, to say the least, highly dysfunctional. But now it's all changed. Now keeping up with breaking news and trying to figure out how social media actually influences human behavior in foreign policy. People act on the basis of what they are inspired to do or not on social media. And it works in favor of repressive governments when they try to shut it down and control it. It works in favor of organized protests as a method of communication. I mean, it's revolutionized matters. And, in America, I think, despite all of the positives, it's helped, unfortunately, to create a situation in which there is no accepted truth. And this is a huge problem, because if millions of people don't agree with millions of others on the basic facts, then you open the door to a human, man or woman, who rides in on a horse or tank with a version of the truth. And that is the precursor to authoritarian behavior in politics. And that's extremely dangerous. I think of all the dysfunctions that confronts our republic, what Rand called truth decay. It's beyond truth decay, though. It's not that truth is decayed. It's just no longer relevant. People invent it and they create it, and they're inspired online to believe it or not to believe it. It's a terrible problem. How do you lead in a government where millions of Americans can't agree on the legitimacy of an election?
Yeah, I'm glad that you asked that question, because you wrote a book about presidential leadership and that we might not ever have another great leader. It's a great book, but this is what you're saying. I mean, you can't lead when there are two different truths about some basic set of ideas, some scientific consensus about something, much less, the outcome of the election. I kind of almost felt bad. I didn't, but I had some sympathy for Donald Trump's State Department, because he was the only president, I would imagine, probably the only leader, because it's so stupid to do this, that would set out an agenda and send his Secretary of State overseas. And by the time they got there, he had tweeted something opposite of his agenda, contradicting the mission. You don't see that in most other countries, and you certainly aren't going to see that in the Biden administration. You have a message that you try to stay on. That doesn't seem to have changed that much, Aaron David Miller.
No, I think that's actually one of the virtues of a certain amount of consistency and stability in public messaging. I mean, if you look at the previous administration's messaging on so many subjects, here it's structured. We know what time Jen Psaki is going to brief every day. She worked at Carnegie before she took this job, and I got to know her. She's a fine human. She actually believes, everyone spins. She's a fine human, and she believes in the truth and preserving the truth. And I think that's critically important to the functioning of a democratic polity. I don't see how you can govern, particularly when the role of government is fundamentally questioned by millions, not to mention the science. The fact that COVID is now rising in 27 states, plateauing in 13, and only declining in 5 is a very serious problem here. Deborah Birx's, bombshell testimony that after the first 100,000 of the surge, that the 400,000 plus Americans who have died, she basically said much of those people, a large, substantial amount of those humans could have been saved. Not that messaging is the only thing that would have been necessary, but John Barry, who wrote The Great Influenza, I asked him, he was on one of these Carnegie Connects program, what's the lesson of that great influenza in 1918, which killed 675,000 Americans before they could even identify. They couldn't see the virus. They didn't know what it was. And anywhere from between 50 to 100 million humans in the world. He said, tell the truth.
Yeah.
You got to tell the truth.
Yeah.
When it's good, it's good. And when it's bad, you got to let people know.
It's interesting that you say that and that you reference that quote, because I just saw before we went on, Joe Biden's head of CDC, I think her name is Dr. Walensky, came on and said, I told you I'd tell you the truth, even if it's bad. And she started warning of a possible fourth wave because of the states, I think, that opened up early and didn't simply do mask mandates. I wanted to ask you, of course, how domestic politics is influencing foreign policy in the Biden administration. Unfortunately, I think it's really been a problem, domestic politics, since the Obama administration, for sure. And you can take us back before that, perhaps. But, there's this old idea about the water's edge and the president of the United States can carry out his or her, well, we've never had her, but hopefully soon, own foreign policy, not to be influenced by the opposition party back at home. And then I remember during the Iran talks, a whole bunch of Republican senators went to Israel or somewhere, or sent a letter to the supreme leader or somebody. They'd interfered, to be frank, with the Obama foreign policy. And we could talk about what happened during Trump. Where are we now?
I think, I am trying to communicate this message to every human that I can. This president confronts the greatest challenge of national recovery of any president since Franklin Roosevelt. And if you believe Doris Kearns Goodwin, who wrote and knows a lot about Lincoln, she even argues possibly since Lincoln. I can identify 4 interlocking crises, which makes this a moment of national emergency. The greatest threat to public health since the great influenza, an economic recession, a degree of polarization that we haven't seen in this country since well, in some respects, worse than the 1960s. I tried to convince a millennial the other day that 1968 was a worse year than 2019. I gave her the notion of the COVID. In 1968, tens of thousands of Americans were dying in Vietnam. Martin Luther King was assassinated. Bobby Kennedy was assassinated. You had riots in 100 American cities, including in this one, where neighborhoods in Washington burned. And then you had Chicago and the Democratic National Convention, where you had severe violence in the election of Richard Nixon. But there was no sale. The millennial basically said, I'm sorry, I don't buy it. She didn't know much about 1968, but nonetheless, she intuited correctly that the country is challenged on so many levels. And then add to that the dysfunction of the political system and the whole notion of truth decay and January 6th. So Biden confronts the greatest challenge of national recovery, which means his priorities, and think of the numbers 5 and 1, okay? 5 seats separate the House of Representatives in Democratic hands or Republican, and 1 seat separates the U.S. Senate. If those go R in 2022, the entire Biden domestic agenda will be undermined. So therefore, since governing is about choosing, this president has identified domestic priorities, COVID, the economy, restoring some measure of comedy and stability here as the greatest challenges he faces, which is why I think, if you ask me 2 months in, which is not a whole lot, judging any administration's foreign policy, if someone asked me, well, how would you characterize Biden's foreign policy? I would say it's risk averse. He's plucked all the low-hanging fruit, rejoining the WHO, rejoining Paris climate, reversing the Muslim ban, trying to be more humane and still functional with respect to immigration and the border,
right?
Restoring relations with allies, re-injecting human rights to some degree into our foreign policy. Trump more or less emptied the frame of foreign policy of human rights.
Reestablishing, if I were to drill down, you're being, somewhat general there, but drilling down to reestablishing a kind of different relationship with our adversaries, North Korea, Russia, and then we can talk about what happened with Saudi Arabia, because that seems to be somewhat complicated and yet important. It's not as simple as people would have it seem.
It's true, but even there, Pete, he was risk averse because he had an option to
right.
lay a lot more of this on Mohammed bin Salman and chose not to. So I think his foreign policy is risk averse. I think he's plucked the low-hanging fruit. I think the harder stuff, what I call the migraine headaches and the root canals, that's what the world is. It's Syria, it's China, it's Russia, and it's how to deal with cyber. These are problems that do not have definitive, comprehensive solutions.
Let me just pose a general question, because in a historical framing, things were easier during, let's say, the 70s and 80s, post-World War II for the United States, because the United States could say, listen, if you don't deal with us, then you're going to starve. Your people are going to starve. If you don't deal with us, then we'll bomb you. If you don't deal with us, there's no options. When it comes to Saudi Arabia, my understanding is one of the complicated issues is MBS is not the king, but he will be the king most likely, and we're going to have to deal with him regardless, one way or another. And the thing that has changed is we can't say if you don't deal with us, because countries can now turn and say, you know what, fine. If you don't want it, we'll go talk with China. In this case, that's the issue. There's other economic superpowers that you can turn to. When we started this trade war, I recall thinking about American agricultural products, we said to China, we're not going to be dealing with you. And they said, fine, we'll go deal with somebody else. We'll buy our soybeans from Brazil, and all these soybean farmers had to go on welfare off the federal government. So it's different now because a country can turn and say, you're not the only game in town. And that seems to be much more complicated. Is that true? And that's what happened with Saudi Arabia?
I think that's partly the case, although the Saudis are incredibly dependent on the United States still. I mean, remember 1990, in August of 1990, when Saddam invades Kuwait, and and directly threatened Saudi Arabia. Neither the Chinese nor the Russians were going to rescue them. H.W. Bush stood up and said it will not stand. They launched a counterattack the following spring of 91. You ended up with removing Saddam's troops, Saudi security, Kuwait were secured. We still provide an enormous amount of support. We do sell them, frankly, and I'm not sure they even need them. They have the fourth largest military budget in the world, and they still can't defend themselves. And yet we've allowed a degree of dysfunction, ruthlessness, and recklessness on the part of Mohammed bin Salman, the would-be king, who probably will be king and could be king, as you pointed out, for 50 plus years. The bottom line on Saudi, I think, is very clear. Until the world frees itself from Arab hydrocarbons, or hydrocarbons generally, we're going to have a stake in ensuring that oil, we don't need it anymore. Do you know January was the first week of January in 2021 was the first week in 35 years that the U.S. imported no Saudi crude. We don't need the oil. The rest of the world does, though. That's the problem.
So there's the issue of energy, but there's the other issue, which is directly connected, of course, to security. And so who do they ally with in the Middle East specifically, much less in terms of economic, trading? It still is very complicated, even if we produce all of our energy here at home renewably, right?
Yeah, although you'd have to make a compelling argument as to why Saudi Arabia would be that relevant and important to the United States if they didn't have any oil.
That they're financing terrorism? I don't know. Something to do with Yemen?
There's still a lot of private support. I think the government, by and large, is out of the direct business. But they spend millions abroad financing madrasa, the Islamic schools, promoting Wahhabi texts, which can be extremely discriminatory against Jews and Christians. What's an ally of the United States? It's a country that shares that there's a high degree of coincidence of interests and values. And frankly, in my judgment, we don't share many values with Saudi. And our interests coincide, but not necessarily these days all the time.
Now, speaking of our allies, I know I got to let you go here in a minute, but I have to ask you what I originally even thought to reach out to you about, which is the Israeli elections. Right. And you made this point in this video that you shared on social media that I thought was really fascinating, that basically Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister of Israel, is holding the country hostage to some extent because of his concern about his own legal exposures and liabilities. That was really, he has to stay in power so he doesn't get arrested.
He has to stay in power and prevent anyone else from becoming prime minister because his trial has already begun. He's 3 counts of bribery, breach of trust, and fraud. And a sitting Israeli prime minister can continue, even if he's indicted, to be the Israeli prime minister until he's convicted. So Netanyahu's hope is that he puts together a narrow right-wing government, which will be very hard, if not impossible this time around, and he'll pass legislation to essentially make it impossible for a sitting Israeli prime minister to be indicted or tried, let alone convicted. And remember, there is precedent for Ehud Olmert spent 18 months in jail. This is an Israeli prime minister for breach of trust, I believe. 18 months in the can. So for Netanyahu, the reason this guy is so remarkably resilient is because he cares more, he wants it more, and he will do more to try to stay in power than any other Israeli pal.
And their country's political system is fascinating, but there's so many different parties, a parliamentary system. This is the 5th time that it's come down to the wire. And I just wanted to ask you at least about one part, the far right. There's Arab Israelis, and there's obviously the concern of everything negotiating with the Palestinians. I read one tweet of yours saying something about Netanyahu somehow had to get Hamas's permission to get something done, which I think is insane to even imagine. But what about the far right, the extreme right? They're super racist, right?
You asked me the most concerning thing about this election is that you have, I believe, six seats went to a block of parties under the name of religious Zionism. There are 3 small parties. One, Noam, is completely, utterly off the charts in terms of their discrimination and homophobia. A second, Jewish Power, has a guy in it by the name of Itamar Ben-Gvir, who, before Rabin's assassination in 95, ripped the hood ornament off of Rabin's Cadillac, the car that he was riding in, or he may not have been riding in it, but he grabbed the hood ornament and said weeks before the assassination, next we're going to get him. And he's a disciple of Meir Kahane, the leader of Kach, the Jewish Defense League and political party, who was assassinated on the streets of New York in 1990. They believe in discriminating, forcible expulsion of Arabs. And this block of 6 seats, I believe, will be seated in the Israeli parliament. Never happened. Well, Kahane won a seat, but then he was banned from participating. I'm hoping this happens this time around, but that's the most concerning development here. And it's, it's profoundly disturbing, and it's going to be, we'll see how the Knesset arithmetic turns out and whether we'll go back to a 5th election or not.
I know I got to let you go. Do you have time to tell me about the Iran talks? You moderated a conference the other day, didn't you?
Yeah. I mean, again, the issue from a very risk-averse president is, sure, he'd like to go back into the JCPO, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. But the real question is, what's the margin? Where's the constituency promoting this? Progressive Democrats are, but mainstream Democrats have been critical of the agreement. The Republicans will be all over his case like a cheap suit. The Israelis are telling the administration, what's the rush? The Iranians are at least 2 years away from weaponizing, and we're not even sure they made a decision to weaponize. So the pressure on Biden to get into an agreement and be universally opposed is great. And he's got a narrow bandwidth. Remember, right. 5 and 1.
Yeah. Razor thin margins in the House and Senate. Yep. And that's always a good reminder to come back to. Aaron David Miller, always a treat to get to talk with you. Happy birthday, and thank you very much for joining me. I love our long relationship. I love being your student.
Roger that, and back at you, Pete. It's a great show. You ask great questions, and your listeners are lucky to have you broadcasting from the inestimable shed.
Very kind. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you for giving the shed a shout out as well. It appreciates it.
Take care.
All right, there goes Aaron David Miller. Was his pounding on the desk, was that annoying? I could really hear it. He moves a lot with his hands in my headphones, but is it one of those things I'm overthinking? Wasn't that annoying and you didn't even hear it, I hope? That is Aaron David Miller, and on Twitter at Aaron D. Miller 2. Please go and let him know that you heard him here on at Stand Up with Pete. Are you following the Twitter handle at Stand Up with Pete? If you aren't, please do that now as well. Give the podcast 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and write a review there, too. That means a lot, apparently, as well. I'm out of time for today. Thank you very much for listening, and I will talk to you tomorrow. I love you. You are not alone. Please subscribe to the podcast with a paid subscription if you haven't already. Go to the show notes. I put a lot of work into all of that, so thank you so much for listening, especially if you're still listening. I love you guys. You are the best. What an amazing community that we have created together, including John Carroll, who is now going to sing and take us away, Johnny.
Straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. start making sense and you stand up. Stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up. Stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up. Stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up. They had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for loss, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up. Oh, got to stand up. Ooh, come on, just stand up. Everybody got to stand up in the darkest hour. Stand up. People got the power. Stand up. Come on, come on, come on. Come on, come on, come on. Come on, come on, come on. Stand up.
All right, at the end of yesterday's podcast, I said I'm going to try to have salad every day this week for lunch. Several of you reached out to me to check in, and I failed because Julia wanted a sandwich. She said, let's please go get a sandwich for lunch, and I ended up splitting a sandwich with her. Yeah, I guess it's just sometimes it's convenience, whatever works out for everybody. Maybe I should have made salad for both of us. Please, somebody help. Salad on Tuesday. That's the plan for today. Thank you. That is my accountability. Tried to have salad every day for lunch this week, and I immediately ate a sandwich. All right. Well, I got a lot done today. I hope that you did as well. And that is today's show ender. I've got nothing more for you. That is it. Seriously, that's the end of the show. Goodbye. I love you. Talk to you later. See you on the Discord platform. Bye-bye. Hugs.